Hello, everyone. This is Mr. Wibby, and today we're going to be looking at Spanish conquistadors and how they assisted Spain in building an empire in the Americas. Let's go ahead and let's jump into this. All right, so our objective for today, the scholars will be able to explain how the conquistadors conquered Native American territories. All right, so we have a few main ideas. Let's look at these main ideas. So the first main ideas, Spanish conquistadors conquered the Aztec and Inca empires. That's the most important one. The second main idea, Spanish explorers traveled through the borderlands of New Spain, claiming more land, and then Spanish settlers treated Native Americans harshly, forcing them to work on plantation and mines. We are primarily going to focus on the first one today. All right, so our essential questions for today are what are the causes of the Aztec and Inca defeats? Number two, what role did the military and technological advantages play in Spain conquering the Aztec and Inca Empire? Number three, what role did religion play in the Aztec fall to Cortes? And number four, what cause do you think is the most important to the Spanish victory? All right, let's go ahead and go into it. Now, in order to jump into this and really understand what we will be discussing and learning for today, we need to actually discuss and understand some vocabulary. So the first one that we have is a conquistador. Conquistador. All right, conquistadors are soldiers who led military expeditions in the Americas. So these are guys who are going to the Americas. They are looking for gold and they are trying to take over territory and claim territory for Spain. Now, remember, we discussed the primary causes of exploration. It was God, gold, and glory. Remember, God, gold, and glory. What's pushing Spain to do this? It's expanding Christianity, spreading Christianity to the New World. That's the God part. Gold is they're looking for riches, and then glory. They want to basically help Spain become the greatest country in the world. So let's go ahead and look at our next vocab. Vocab. You guys get it. You have conquer. To conquer is to take over a territory, using it for, well, to take over a territory through military might. So you use your military to take over a territory and to control that territory and claim it for your mother country or your land. Today we'll be pretty much looking at Spain. All right, so before we jump in it, let's kind of go over why Spain is adamant about taking over the Americas. The Spanish kept hearing fables and stories from Native Americans of these beautiful lands that contain large amounts of gold in the New World. And so that sent the Spanish conquistadors crazy. They were in a frenzy trying to discover gold. These men wanted to travel the New World to find wealth for Spain as well as for themselves. All right, so as Spain is traveling to the New World, there are two major empires. You have in what we call Mexico today, you have the Aztec Empire. And in South America, you have the Inca Empire. So the Aztec Empire is very important. It's ruled by a guy named Moctezuma II. He ruled from 1466 to 1520. He was the ruler of the Aztec Empire. His capital city was Tenochtitlan, which honestly I probably am not saying that correctly, but Tenochtitlan, I'd heard Tenochtitlan, but I'm probably not saying that correctly. That city was built in the middle of a lake on Texcoco. All right, so the next thing, you had a leader, a ruler, a guy named Hernan Cortes. Hernan Hernan Cortes was a Spanish conquistador. And remember the definition of conquistador. So Hernan Cortes, like I said, was a Spanish conquistador that left Cuba to sail to present-day Mexico. When Cortes arrived, the Aztec ruler Moctezuma II believed that he was actually the god Quetzalcoatl. I think that's, once again, I might not be saying that correctly. So now let's look at this. The Aztec, they had a lot of soldiers. They were one of the strongest empires in their territory. They conquered a lot of smaller empires. Something that's not stated in the PowerPoint, Hernan Cortes and his men had built relationships with Native Americans along their travels. And a lot of those Native Americans were enemies with the Aztecs. So Hernan Cortes used those tribes in order to divide and conquer. They call it divide and conquer. And he used those tribes to basically get knowledge of the Aztecs and get understanding of the Aztec strength and the Aztec weaknesses. So, of course, Cortes had 508 soldiers, about 100 sailors, and 16 horses, and he had guns. Now, Cortes initially was received as a friend because, once again, Moctezuma believed that Cortes was the god because he had heard of a prophecy which explained that a white-skinned man would come from the east and he would be a god and he would take the Aztec people back to their original lands. Now, although Cortes was received and was received as a friend, was received with respect and endearment by Moctezuma, Cortes eventually took Moctezuma prisoner and seized control of the capital city. This started a war. Eventually, the war would destroy, leave Tenochtitlan in ruins, and Moctezuma would lose his empire. He would eventually be killed, and Cortes would lead Spain into taking over the Aztec Empire. Most of you guys who are of Mexican American descent, whether you call yourself Mexican, Hispanic, Latino, the Aztec people are a part of your heritage. Let me move so that the lights will turn back on. All right, and I'm back. So there's a few things that I must note that actually they had help from some of the Aztec enemies that were Native Americans also. That's Cortes had help and assistance, so that's how they made the Aztec fall. Smallpox and other diseases also quickened the fall of the Aztec Empire. The next guy that we have is Francisco Pizarro. Francisco Pizarro lived from 1478 to 1541. He also heard great rumors of the empire in South America. He believed that they had a lot of gold. So therefore he led an expedition that way, which the Aztecs, they ruled pretty much South America. So we're going further south beyond Mexico down to South America. Pizarro had fewer than 400 men, but the conquistadors had guns and swords. So their technology gave them an advantage against the Aztec. Though outnumbered, Pizarro's troops captured the great Inca capital at Cusco in present-day Peru and killed the Inca leaders. By 1534, Pizarro and his Native American allies had conquered all of the Incan territory. So once again, we are seeing that the Spaniards befriended many of the tribes in the area. And because the Aztec and the Incas were powerful Native American empires, they had enemies amongst some of the smaller groups. And so therefore, what you're going to see, the allies or some of those smaller Native American tribes assisted the Spanish along the way in conquering the larger Native American empires, those that were like the Aztec and the Inca. Another one that you have is Juan Ponce de Leon, 1471 to 1521. Juan de Leon was a Spanish conquistador known for leading the first official European expedition to Florida. In 1508, de Leon landed on the Caribbean island of Puerto Rico. In 1511, he conquered the island for Spain, and he founded the city that is today still there, and it's called San Juan. In 1512, de Leon discovered the coast of present-day Florida. Around 1540, de Leon led his men through what is now known as Georgia and Florida. So let's go ahead and look at the reasons for the Spanish victories. There are a few. Causes of the Aztec and Inca defeat. So why did Spain win? Well, Spain had greater technological advances. So the Spanish had steel and armor weapons. The Spanish also had horses. One of the other major factors is many of the European diseases that the Europeans brought with them to the New World decimated the Native American population. So the Aztec and Inca lost a lot of soldiers because they were dying to diseases and their empires were already weak. Also, the Spanish made alliances with the Aztec and Inca enemies. So the Spanish made these alliances with, like I told you guys earlier, with these tribes that had traditionally been enemies of the Aztec and Inca. So what are going to be some of the long-term effects of the Spanish victory? The effects would be the reduced numbers of the Native American population. Remember, they are, number one, going to be conquered. You're going to have soldiers die at war, but not just that. The Spaniards are coming to the New World with various diseases. Also, the Spanish will begin to rule the Americas. If you look at, if you study anything about North and South America, Spanish is the most spoken language in the Americas. Spain is a country in Europe. So the fact that the Spanish language is so spoken lets you know how far the Spanish Empire's rule kind of shifted. And then eventually you'll have the Columbian exchange where you have goods that are shipped from the old world to the new world, and then the new world to the old world. You also have diseases shipped from the new world to the old world to the new world. Because farming became so hard, what you're going to find as we go into our next lessons, that the Spanish developed a system of slavery in the new world in which they used the Native Americans first. All right, so that's the end of my lecture for today. Go back and answer those questions using the information that you guys learned today. All right, have a blessed day.